In this video, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to how Revit thinks about a project differently than how CAD does. I'm going to walk you through just a very basic overview of the interface and how an interior designer will access things on the interface. And then finally, I'm going to just show you a couple of different ways that we can look at elements in a project through basic visibility settings and changes. So if you have installed Revit 2020 on your computer, you can go to the open page, and yours might have other things. I've got some current projects open, but what I want you to do is open this sample architecture project. And so the first thing that I want you to realize as you're operating Revit is that Revit depends on the designer to create a model. And so you might hear me use the term drawing, but really I'm going to try my hardest to refer to this as a Revit model, because this is really almost like a physical model that you can hold in your hand. And so Revit has the designer create this three-dimensional thing, this model, and then the designer decides what views um, they want the viewer to see, and then dictates that on the actual model. So, for example, we may have a mixture of a bunch of different, sections or elevations or floor plans, a handful of renderings, but ultimately it's all being taken of the same model. And so, um, what we want to think about is, of course, AutoCAD is an infinitely huge drafting table that thinks about projects in 2 dimensions and allows you to draw perfectly straight lines in 2 dimensions, such as elevations and floor plans. But it doesn't ever have a physical three-dimensional shape associated with it. And so they're really two different animals when you compare Revit and AutoCAD and how they think about a project. What I would like to do now is move on from discussing the differences between how CAD and Revit think about a project and look at an actual project. And so what I'm going to do is just click over here in the project browser just for a second, because uh, controlling what I show you here will allow us to manipulate this interface a little bit better. What you're seeing right here is a floor plan, the first floor plan or the level 1 floor plan of this project. But as we look at the interface itself, I'm going to kind of describe the buttons that you're going to see in a clockwise direction. So there's some shortcuts happening up here for save and open. I don't really use these very much, but they're here if you want to kind of tool around with them. I tend to use the shortcut commands like, control open or control save, because I'm just used to using, those same commands in Word and AutoCAD when I use it. What you'll see down here is the ribbon, and there's a lot of different commands in Revit, and so they're all grouped according to these different tabs. So under the File tab, you can see here, when you click that, it's going to do all those, kind of basic shortcuts that are also up here. But if you want to build things, they're going to be in the Architecture tab. And so I'll often refer to saying, okay, we're going to draw a wall now. So go to the Architecture tab into the Build section, and there's all the building commands. Circulation. So if we're going to draw stairs, it would be in the Architecture tab in the Circulation section. So we'll be using the Architecture tab a lot. We'll be using the Insert tab just a couple of times. We'll be using a lot of the Annotate, because this is where we add annotations of all different kinds to our drawings and sheets and views. We will also be using the View command to create, the View tab to create different views of our project, whether it's, just a nice axonometric for us to be able to see things, sections, elevations, or a really beautiful rendering down the road. There's just a couple of things that we'll be doing in the Manage tab, and then we'll also be depending on this Modify, which is going to allow us to manipulate our shapes and move things around. And some of these commands may be familiar to you if you're used to working in AutoCAD. Over here, if you decide that you do not want to use a mouse, which I do not recommend, I think you should definitely use a mouse when operating Revit. But if you like to use a touchpad and click a lot and make things take a little bit longer, you can also click here, and these allow you to zoom in and out if you don't have a mouse to roll and see things in 2D and 3D views. And you won't see me use those ever, because I will always be using a mouse, but you can play around with those if you like. You can roll your mouse in and out to zoom in. You can hold your mouse down and pan just like you do in AutoCAD. And then you can use these, you know, drag bars or whatever they're called, to drag your view around. Down here, you will see some other selection tools that allow you to grab and move and cut things, but I don't really use these this way either, but you can play around with them if you like. The great thing about Revit is that there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. So, you'll develop your own workflow over time and as you watch other people draft, but I kind of depend on the ones that I was taught. So there's a little bit of variation here. These are the view settings. And so Revit allows you to view your model in lots of different ways. So we can see it in, sort of a cartoony rendered view. We can see it in a hidden line view. For example, if I go up to view and I can see my 3D view. Okay, so this is a realistic as it can get within Revit. If you want it to be a photorealistic rendering, we have to export it. But you can see here that I can adjust the view here to make it, hidden line, and then it's just a black and white drawing. Or if we wanted to try out different colors quickly, you could also just kind of play with it in this view. It'll move a little bit slower if you view things in a realistic view. You can see as I change back, it's kind of getting itself hung up a little bit. The other thing before we move on that I want to show you is the visibility settings. And so, for example, we can see this wall right here. We can see it in this view. And I can click on it. And if I want to see what's happening beyond that wall, I can right click and hide it in view. If I hide elements, it will just hide that wall. If I do category, it'll hide all the walls. So I can hide that wall, and then I can start to zoom in and see what's happening inside. If I want to see what I've hidden and reveal it again, I can click on this little light bulb, and it'll say in pink, hey, that wall is being hidden, and all I have to do is right click and unhide, and it will appear again. Okay, so we'll get into all these visibility settings because we're going to need to be able to see and unsee things as we progress. What you're seeing here is the project browser, and this is really important. We'll be using the project browser a lot because this is the way that you navigate through your project. So for example, this is our just kind of default 3D view, but if I want to see the level 1 or the level 2 floor plan, I can see that here. If I want to go ahead and delete, for example, this couch here, this sofa, I can click on it and delete it here, and it'll delete it everywhere else in the project. That sofa no longer exists. You won't see it in an elevation, you won't see it in a section, you won't see it in a rendering. It's gone. And I just hit Control-Z to bring it back. There's also, the designers also created a series of 3D views with their camera, and so we can see these all here. And this is what you might see on the cover page. There's also a series of elevations. Again, these exist whether the designer creates them or not, because it's a 3D model. So even if you put a tree in your drawing and that's all you did, you would still be able to see elevations of each side of that tree. So those exist regardless. Sections we have to create, and there's a series of exported renderings here. So once all of these different things, which are called views, are created, then you drag them onto sheets. And so you can see here, there's a sheet section. And you can see that there's different ways and different objects on each sheet. So if I double clicked in here, this you could think of as like a viewport in AutoCAD. And again, we're going to spend a lot of time making these, so I don't expect you to retain anything as far as the technicalities of how you make these things. but I do want you to just kind of have an awareness of the three-dimensional quality of this model. So again, I can delete that couch here. And because that's a view that has been drug onto a sheet, you can see here, it's gone in this view as well. Because again, it's all the same model. So that's the beauty of Revit. So you can see here, the sheets are here. Any three-dimensional object that's been brought in can also be found in families, and we'll be making our own custom families. This here is the Properties tab, and as you click on anything within your Revit model, you can see its properties will reveal themselves. And there's a whole lot of stuff, as I like to say, kind of under the hood here that we can really start to tinker with, and we will later. But as you move along here, you can see if I click on this chair, the properties of the chair will come up. As I click on, the tag, these are window tags here, the properties of the window tags will reveal themselves. So what I would like for you to do now is just take a few minutes to play with this model, see what happens if you click on, different 3D views, or if you decide you want to hold down your shift command and your wheel on your mouse and roll this thing around and really see it in a bunch of different ways. You can select things, hide them, delete them. You're not going to break anything. This is a sample project, so it doesn't really matter what you do to it because we're not going to be messing with it much more for the remainder of the term. So it's yours to have fun with, okay? So now that you've gone through this process, you should have a slightly better understanding of the difference in how Revit thinks about a project versus AutoCAD. You have a little bit more of a familiarity with the Revit interface, especially the tabs and functions that will relate to an interior designer. And then you also have an understanding of the quality of Revit that allows you to see, for example, a wall or a roof in multiple different views and hide and unhide as needed. Okay, so have some fun with this now.